our previous episode, we discussed the rise and fall of the first empire in history, the Akkadian Empire. Its great rulers from Sargon to Naram-Sin broke the mold and set in motion a way of running a state which would be emulated for thousands of years to come. From this point forward, the empire would be the prominent form of government. However, before another could rise in the region, a dark age had to be overcome. After the fall of Akkad, the Gutians had established their own dynasty and hegemony in the Euphrates River Valley, which would set the stage for what was to come. Welcome to our video on the brief Sumerian Renaissance and the eventual rise of Babylon. With the shattering of Akkadian supremacy by the mid-22nd century BC, a period of fragmentation once again occurred. A series of kings from the region of Gutium reigned for almost a century from the former Akkadian capital, and had relatively symbolic authority over the southern region of Sumer. While the period was one of uncertainty for government and trade, the Sumerian south managed to gain considerable economic advantage from the limited tribute exacted by the Gutian kings in Akkad. Several great native Sumerian rulers reigned in this era, including Gudea, who ruled the powerful city of Lagash from 2144 to 2124 BC. He seems to have been a peaceful and humble ruler, using the title of Ensi rather than the more grandiose Lugal despite his vast power, seeing himself as a representative on earth of his city god, Ningirsu, to which he dedicated many honest prayers and statues. He was also a social reformer, cancelling debt and allowing women to inherit and own family property if their husbands were to perish. The man who would end the period was Utu-Higal of the 5th Uruk dynasty. He formed a coalition of Sumer and faced the great Gutian king Tirigan in battle, luring him into a trap and defeating him after arresting 2 of the Gutian envoys. Tirigan fled on his war chariot and attempted to escape, but was captured and executed by Utu-Higal, who now established a brief period of Uruk hegemony. However, in 2112 BC, an Ensi named Ur-Nammu overthrew the Uruk hegemony and established the 3rd dynasty of Ur. 5 kings of this new nascent empire ruled until 2004 BC and consolidated their rule through efficient and extensive administrative talent rather than constant expansionism. The 3rd dynasty established the first directly controlled economy, while the traditionally independent city-states of Sumer and Akkad lost their autonomy. For the first time, Ensi were not native representatives of the larger empire, but appointed governors under the rule of the kings at Ur. This was similar to the way Ionian Greek cities were initially administered by the Persian-appointed tyrants after their conquest of Lydia, where governors were installed in Ephesus, Halicarnassus, and other cities in the region. In addition, the native Sumerian gods were replaced by the deified kings of Ur. This loss of autonomy and the disruption of traditional religious practices is likely to have engendered significant anger towards the Ur kings, and it is hinted in the sources that many rebellions occurred but were not documented by the ruling dynasty. Despite this, the cities of Sumer experienced great prosperity during the 3rd Ur dynasty, with the construction of new canals promoting new trade routes throughout the realm. Most long-lasting of all Ur's achievements was the Ur Ziggurat, which survives to this day, 4,100 years later. Calculation of soil richness and other estimates for the optimal production of goods were also taken, drastically increasing economic efficiency in the centrally controlled system. All of this prosperity benefited the large cities, but also allowed other smaller centres to prosper and grow. One of these newer cities was formerly a small and obscure town, but had grown to become one of the economic provincial cores of the 3rd Ur dynasty's empire, Babylon. Like all empires, the 3rd dynasty of Ur began to decline around the end of the 21st century BC. Famine, drought, and invasions by a new nomadic group, the Amorites, began to take its toll, and the empire ceased to exist in 2004 BC. When a series of conflicts with their eastern neighbours came to its conclusion, with Elam as the victor, who then destroyed Ur. Into this Mesopotamian vacuum of power came ever more Amorite tribes, now with royal ambitions. These nomadic semi-pastoralists, whose name literally means people of the West, supposedly originated in the Highlands region west of the Middle Euphrates. These Amorites were the very same people whom the Israelites supposedly defeated in the biblical texts. Their lifestyle before the migrations into the river valleys consisted of seasonal migrations from semi-arid areas in the winter and wet areas in the summer to tend their herds. Conflict between the settled civilizations in Mesopotamia and the Amorites began as early as the reign of Akkadian king Shar-Kali-Shari, in whose reign a battle was fought with the nomads, as attested to by his 12th year name. Significant numbers of Amorites moving into the Tigris-Euphrates region, as mentioned before, was a key factor in the decline and fall of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, with their initial mass settlement in the Mesopotamian region being dated to this period. The Amorite invasions of the Near East took place in several phases. During the first, they invaded and dominated Palestine. In the second, they thrust north and invaded the Syrian region, including Ebla, Mari, Yamhad, Katna, and Ekalatum. Finally, they invaded northern and southern Mesopotamia, taking root and establishing dynasties in Isin, Larsa, and Babylon. Upon encountering the sophisticated and seemingly splendorous civilization which had developed in the Euphrates-Tigris region, they must have wanted to become a part of it and never left, melding so well into the local populations that after a few decades they were indistinguishable from the natives. We know that this period was one of warfare between the scattered Near Eastern kingdoms, but we do not know the details of most of these realms. The most prominent known Amorite kingdom in the north was eventually centered on the ancient city of Mari. During the 3rd Ur dynasty period, Mari was nominally a vassal of the Ur kings and enjoyed prosperity, but suffered a sharp decline after its fall, and Mari itself was even abandoned. Near the end of the 19th century BC, a ruler of Amorite Simalite descent named Yagid-Lim conquered many cities in the region of Mari on the Middle Euphrates. Carrying on the momentum, he took the old city itself as his capital in 1830 BC and established the 3rd Mariite kingdom under the so-called Lim dynasty. His son, Yadun-Lim, inherited the throne and would begin Mari's most prosperous century. He introduced the Babylonian language and writing style as the administrative standard, introduced the old Akkadian practice of year names, pursued military conquests against neighbouring states and nomadic tribes, constructed irrigation systems, and constructed fortresses to consolidate territorial gains. The dynamism of this new Amorite dynasty established Mari as the dominant state on the Middle Euphrates. However, overextension would soon have dire consequences. This period of fragmentation in ancient Mesopotamia was one of constant warfare, and the Mari ruler attempted to expand towards the Habur River, which brought him into conflict with the kingdom of Upper Mesopotamia under its ruler Shamshi-Adad. After suffering some defeats to their new enemy, Yadun-Lim was assassinated in a palace coup orchestrated by his son during 1795 BC, and then 2 years later, Mari itself was conquered. Shamshi-Adad was himself one of the great rulers of the Amorite period. He also belonged to a family of Amorite tribal chiefs who had long fought against the aforementioned Yagid-Lim and the state of Eshnunna to the southeast. At one point, during a time of weakness for the upcoming ruler, Shamshi-Adad had to flee to the rising state of Babylon due to his home city of Ekalatum being threatened by neighbouring domains. However, after a few years of exile, he returned to power in Ekalatum and subjugated the old Assyrian region and Assur itself. He removed Assyrian king Ereshum from the throne and declared himself king of Assyria, and this region was then assigned to his eldest son, Ishmi-Dagan, with a capital at Ekalatum. One of the key moments in Shamshi-Adad's reign came when he managed to conquer the internally squabbling Lim dynasty of Mari, where he proceeded to appoint his younger son, Yasma-Adu, as co-ruler in this region. Meanwhile, Shamshi-Adad himself constructed an entirely new city named Shubat-Enlil. This established an almost triarchic system of government, with his sons acting as both co-kings and practical governors of important regions. We also know about the contrasting relationship between Shamshi-Adad and his two sons in relation to their position. He favoured his elder son, Ishmi-Dagan, who was viewed as a competent and able administrator of his province, and often left him to rule his region independently. Meanwhile, the younger son, Yasma-Adu, was viewed as immature, incompetent, and in constant need of guidance from his father and brother. On one occasion, he constructed many statues of the gods in Mari without taking into account the recurring costs of the cattle needed for sacrifices. However, it is possible that these strains could have been exacerbated or even caused by Shamshi-Adad's constant requests for the economic resources of Mari. From the provision of troops for his many military endeavours to the supplying of technical and administrative specialists for his many public works projects, Mari's subordinate status drained the city consistently. Having conquered Mari, Shamshi-Adad now acquired a western border with the powerful kingdom of Yamhad, with its capital at Aleppo. Worried about this potential threat, a marriage alliance was forged between the empire based at Shubat-Enlil and the Ketna, which was to the south of Yamhad. In this period of his supremacy, it is speculated that one of the vassals of Shamshi-Adad may have been the Amorite king of nascent Babylon, Hammurabi. Despite the brief period of prosperity which his strangely administered empire enjoyed, it was not to last. The Turku nomads from the Zagros mountains penetrated deep into northern Mesopotamia, and many regions in the empire rebelled. On top of this, Shamshi-Adad's ally in the powerful kingdom of Eshnunna died and was replaced by a hostile, ambitious king. Meanwhile, Yamhad began to launch attacks from the west. As his reign progressed, more authority was delegated to his sons and family, and finally, in 1776 BC, Shamshi-Adad perished. The Mari segment of his empire collapsed almost immediately under the incompetent younger son, who was expelled, being replaced by a supposed claimant of the Lim dynasty, Zimri-Lim. Meanwhile, Ishmi-Dagan retained control only of a drastically reduced Assyrian region, consisting mainly of Assur, Ekalatum, and the immediate vicinity. Over the next few decades, he would engage in a rivalry with Zimri-Lim. Unfortunately for Ishmi-Dagan, he was cut off from the prosperous Sumerian and Anatolian trade routes by the expansionary Lim dynasty, and this made his influence weaken even further. The continuous bouts of warfare between the rivals eventually drew in other powers from the wider region, eager to gain from the conflict, such as Larsa, Babylon, Isin, and others. Eventually, this fragmentation of power caused a wider period of warfare to erupt in the region, when the Eshnunna kingdom began to rapidly expand to the north and west. It was opposed by Zimri-Lim of Mari, Yamhad, and Babylon, and over the subsequent years, its progress was rolled back and the annexed cities were abandoned. While its peripheral gains had been erased, Eshnunna was still too powerful to attack directly. At this point, a new phase of the conflict began when Elam struck Eshnunna from the east, tipping the balance of power. They besieged the capital city, initially supported by Mari and Babylon. However, when the Elamites threatened to expand their power into these regions as well, they turned against Elam and managed to defeat them. This victory ended the period of region-wide warfare, but would also set the stage for the next hegemon to ascend to prominence, Hammurabi of Babylon.